founder and CEO of GlobeEco, an agricultural-based climate tech company. GlobeEco reimagines large-scale agricultural production from plantation to product. Developed the company's novel factory-to-farm mobile manufacturing platform to solve supply chain impediments and enable innovative new products. This system is the key to manifesting the company's People, Planet, Prosperity mission to support the livelihood of millions of small farmers and over 17 U.S. UN Sustainable Development Goals. Previously, Matthew developed a non-thermal process to enhance nutrition, flavor, and extend the shelf life of coconut food products. Prior to GlobeEco, Matt spent his career in Silicon Valley developing new technologies. These include 3D modeling systems for assessing brain injuries, several consumer applications, and emission critical commercial systems. So Matt splits his time between the Tampa Bay area and Southeast Asia. And without further ado, I'll ask speaker, Matthew Gessert.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Yep. Excuse me. Well, while he's queuing that up, I just want to say how delighted and excited I am to be here for a whole host of reasons. I don't know why my voice is going now, but I just spent the past little over 2 months in the Philippines, and got back on Monday, and it was a very fun trip. I'm sharing with some of the folks here. There was a typhoon on Friday. I was supposed to leave on Friday this past week, and so there was a typhoon down there. And unlike in the U.S., when the planes take off, we say only in the Philippines, because they do things a little different there. So there was a moment where the eye was over the airport. So that was the whole idea for the plane was going to take off through the eye of the typhoon, which was not a very exciting idea for me. Thankfully, the eye blinked and it closed right at the last minute, so we all had to get off the plane, and then thankfully, because the airport closed and what have you. So aside from all of that, again, it's great to be back here. We spent a lot of time at Rosebud, working with the plastics folks and everything else. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit, take you on a journey to the other side of the globe. You know, one of the things when you're dealing with countries like the Philippines, which is where we operate, you don't have a lot of the same safety nets as they are here. I mean, having a great corporate citizen like Publix, for example, with the food support that they do for the food pantries, you don't see that in countries like the Philippines. When they deal with food security issues, which is a very big problem there, you see it. It's kids starving. It's people that don't have enough food to eat. So I want to give you a little bit of a perspective on different aspects to the food security issue that we see in that region, because I think to a large degree that's a canary in a coal mine for us here in the United States. And some of the things which you'll see potentially are things that are in our future. Hopefully we're a little better prepared, but they're really quite significant nonetheless. So the Philippines actually is one of the countries that's targeted globally as one of the most vulnerable to climate change. And you can see some of the reasons here. Food security is a big one. They're an agricultural country by definition, so when climate change occurs, it affects them in a very fundamental way, not only from their GDP, but many of the farmers are all subsistence farmers, so if the food goes bad, they have nothing to eat and there's no safety nets for them, so it's a very catastrophic thing. And I was lucky enough to meet the First Lady on my trip there, Lisa Marcos, and she was sharing again the issue that they're trying to deal even at COP27 in Egypt that's going on now, actually in a couple of days, because a lot of the countries, the Western countries, have committed to helping countries like the Philippines in their adaptation, but due to other commitments like the wars and the inflation, a lot of that money is not moving. So again, just me being kind of a missionary or an evangelist, just to help create some awareness of what's going on in that part of the world, I feel like is part of my role here as well. So one of the things I'd like to share with you just on this one, this is very personal for me. My wife's family is Filipino, and we're on a very small island If you're familiar with the Philippines, it's about 7,400 islands in a chain. And one of the tiniest provinces is a province called Camiguin. And on the island of Camiguin, one of their primary crops, which feeds the entire island, is a fruit called a lanzones. Is anyone here just curious? Anyone know a lanzones? A couple of people. It's a sweet fruit. And the island's entire livelihood is built on coconut and lanzones. And you'll see over here that a farmer's about 40 feet up in the air, and it's amazing still the acrobatics that they do when they're climbing these trees. There's no shoes on, and they just go up there very easily. But this tree should be covered with these white fruit that you see there. And you see there's just like barely any of them hanging on there. And they don't know why, other than climate change. So the entire island has stopped producing lanzones 4 years ago. So instead of having a harvest that supplies the family income for the entire year, they get a couple of random stalks of fruit that don't pay for anything, essentially. They're not even harvesting because it's too expensive to harvest when they're that scattered. And so again, the issue when we talked to some of the food scientists and the agriculturists there, and it really has to do with the weather change. So the lanzones require a certain temperature gradient where it's hot and then it rains, and if that gets upset, they just don't produce any longer. So again, where the rubber hits the road is you have a people that an entire culture where just the climate change affects their food security, and that this is things that they eat, but also their livelihood, which is what they can use to buy food. So this is another aspect of it which affects that country, and countries in Southeast Asia more than others. So we know that the war in Ukraine, this is again where the news comes to life, right? We see here the news is covered with Donald Trump or Joe Biden or all of these political things, but on the front pages in their papers there are issues that are dealing with this food security. So I'm not sure how many people are aware, but Ukraine has been at the center because they're such a big grain supplier, and Russia has gone back and forth with either embargoing those grain shipments. And so earlier this week, the shipments were shut off, and then just a couple of days ago they were turned back on. But this is really important because that grain feeds Southeast Asia and Africa, and they need those grains. That's what they're feeding their people with. And so when they don't have that, it's a very catastrophic thing for food security. And then on the other side, which people don't realize either, is that Russia is a major supplier of fertilizer. So I'll show you in a slide in a minute why that impacts the country as well. But these are things that, again, we know about them, but we don't really see that it affects us in a material way at this point. So again, just kind of continuing my surfing the world here. This was, again, this was September 9th. So again, in light of all these grain shortages, people have started to migrate to other grains. So rice became very important. And so again, India is a very big exporter of rice, but then they just announced that they're going to put a duty on their rice exports to, again, keep them more in the country to avoid shortages there. Again, this rice is typically being exported to countries like Asia and the Philippines, and again, now they're being squeezed on that as well. So if that's not bad enough, let's keep going. This storm is the one that I flew into. I told you I flew out of one on this past weekend, but when I arrived there, I flew into this one. This was Typhoon Karti, and this one here destroyed a whole bunch of rice fields in the Philippines. So they're saying now that almost 10% of the country's output of rice has been destroyed by this typhoon. So again, going back to climate change, these typhoons are becoming much more intense, similar to what happens here in the United States. They may not be as frequent, but they're becoming much more intense. And when they do, they're literally washing out this. So again, think of all the things that just crossed, I just circled through, right? We have, the war with the grain shortage, we have the input on the fertilizer, we have the flooding in here. You can imagine that is a big concern to people for food security in that part of the world. So this is a briefing. We get briefings on a regular basis there, and I just want to make this come clear to everybody. If you look here, you can see the prices, the commodity prices that have changed just since the beginning of the year, almost 100% on wheat and all these. And remember, these are people who are, they don't have a safety net. There's no welfare system there. So when these supplies, these people who have very little means anyway, when these prices go up, they can't afford to buy them. There's no more, you just can't feed your family. But what that impacts also is, if you look on the top one, that's the impact on GDP. And you can also see on the bottom one the changes in poverty. But you'll notice that fertilizer prices is right up there, and food prices. So the fertilizer prevents them from being able to do their planting. So now the farmers can't even plant because they need the fertilizer to grow the rice. So again, I'm just kind of surfing around. You see all the things that affect food security that again were shocking to me. And I was down, this is my first post-COVID return to the Philippines, and it was shocking to me to see this in such a palatable way, because again, it's not just statistics on a PowerPoint. I mean, it's people's lives. So let's keep going here. I want to switch over to coconut really briefly here, because coconut's really important to our business, and I'll explain that in a minute. But to give you an idea of the storms here, this one was earlier in the year, and I want to talk about this in segueing into their building resilience into a food supply. But on this one here, these storms are so powerful, they literally take the coconut trees right out of the ground. I mean, they don't just get topped, they literally are lifted and they're gone. And this one here was, I think, over 10 million trees. Put it in scope, the Philippines has maybe 300 million trees, but 10 million trees in a particular region decimates the entire island culture that these trees were in. Because most of the time when they come through the country, they're hitting a particular area with a lot of intensity. And again, what's happened, it's not just that the trees are gone, because these farmers rely on that to eat and for their food supply, but it's their source of economic vitality. So in the country where you have large coconut plantations, you have these massive plants. They're coconut mills, and so all the farmers take their coconuts to these giant plants, and those plants themselves are employers for tens of thousands of people throughout the country in these regions. But what happens when a situation like this occurs? Those trees are gone, and they're gone for 7 years. It takes 7 years to replant them from the time they get them, and it's not always, they don't start them right away. But it could be 7, 8, 10 years. But in the meantime, that plant, that monolithic plant that was sitting there, goes out of business because it can't be sustained by just sitting there for 10 years with no raw materials to run the factory. So the factory shuts down. So again, that's what also happened on the island that I was talking about, Come Again. So they had Lanzones, they also had coconut, but then the coconut plantations got destroyed, and then their plant closed. So they literally have no source of livelihood for any of that. But the coconuts that are being destroyed there are another really key feature. This one here was just another one, again, just giving an idea. It's shocking to see the coconut fields disappear like that. Again, it's an important crop for all of these people. So this transition, just quickly, I'm going to go over to why do we care about coconuts. We are a climate technology company now, but we started out as a poverty alleviation company, an impact investor, so to speak, because we realized that there's all these coconut plantations, which are amazing. Coconut is one of my favorite plants on earth. You should research it if you want to find what a really interesting plant is. It has so many really cool features. But when you realize that, because if a coconut farmer was in a time machine and you put him back 200 years ago, they would be doing the exact same thing. He could come from 200 years ago, come today, and it would be the exact same business that he was doing 200 years ago. There would be no change. And the trouble is that, again, as the world has evolved, there's no investment that's being made there, and as a result of that, the industry is stagnating, the trees aren't being replaced, their productivity is way down, and the industry is considering a sunset industry because nobody's investing in it anymore. And coming from the technology world, I was of the mindset, again, we put our technology goggles on and we can use technology to solve all kinds of problems. And that was how I got into this to start with. But the interesting thing is the world's coconut plantations are pretty substantial. It's 13.5 million hectares of existing planted land. Unfortunately, it's not very productive right now. And so that's kind of where we come into the business here. One thing I'll point out is this picture on the left, which is the coconut tree is unique in the world in its carbon cycle. The coconut tree, unlike most trees where they grow as a biomass, takes photosynthesis, it converts sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, and it forms it into the mass of the tree. And the tree continues to grow and it gets bigger, and it stores all that carbon in the biomass of the tree. Well, the coconut tree, once it grows to a certain height, it doesn't grow anymore, and the biomass, the root ball is very small, and the tree is capped off. But what it does is it sheds all of this biomass on a regular basis. Now, what happens now, and that's, like this, is my touchy-feely, this is pretty much people know what coconut debris looks like from the husks and the branches. But what they're doing now is they burn that, they openly burn that in fields. And so that right now is about, just to give you an idea, that's about 100 million tons of this material being burned every year. So you think the beauty of the coconut plantation, it is the best carbon dioxide removal system on Earth, bar none. There is none. You look at all the money spent on direct air capture, it is a tiny rounding error in terms of the amount of carbon dioxide that's being brought in by coconut trees. But what's happening is it's delivered to us easily. It lands on the ground, so it's all sequestered, partially sequestered carbon dioxide. And what we did is we developed a process to turn it into building materials. So it is ASTM-rated building materials that literally are one-for-one replacements for timber-based lumber. And one of the other things that we developed with this, which because coconut is such an amazing plant, is we can take plastics, in fact, any plastic. And we were joking earlier, it's like, I feel like the Statue of Liberty, bring us your dirtiest plastics. Any plastic, marine plastic, UV degraded plastic, we don't care. We can take any amount of that plastic, and up to 40% by weight can be put into this board and sequestered for building materials are typically associated with a 100-year life cycle. I feel like an infomercial now, but there's more. This wood, unlike other wood products, can be recycled over and over and over again. So we have a piece of wood like this that can be recycled to its virgin state. We've done it several hundred times. So if this has a 100-year life cycle, again, you can do that times 100. That's how long we can continue to keep that carbon dioxide sequestered in the building material. And so our goal is to have everybody have a big recycle symbol on their house. So when your house is done, you literally grind it back up, send it back over to us. We'll take a truck and we'll make virgin material, and it turns into the wood that can be used over and over again. So that's really cool for the carbon dioxide portion. Oh, sorry. I'm almost finished here. So this is essentially the mechanics of this, which is we are the only climate company that actually makes money for every ton of carbon dioxide removed. So for each ton of carbon dioxide, we actually get $200 for the wood that we sell. So if you know how much carbon dioxide removal costs in the community today, it's about anywhere between $800 to $1,600 a ton. We make $200 a ton. This is what our plant looks like. It's basically, we built the resilience by, it all runs its own energy. It's coming from the coconut shell, so we have no outside energy inputs. Because of the typhoons, what I told you before about those monolithic plants, we actually have the ability to move our these containerized units. So the coconuts go on one side and all the finished products come out the other side. But the advantage is now we can use that money to increase the productivity of the plantations themselves. So a coconut plantation is typically operates just a coconut, but we can add a middle tier, which would be cacao or coffee or mango with middle tier, and then ground crops on the bottom. And so we're actually talking about maybe a 10 times increase in the farmer's income with this based on the investment that we made there. And then finally, this goes to some of the comments that we talked about earlier with the regenerative farming, increasing the soil organic matter. We generate as a byproduct biochar, and we use the biochar to recondition the soil. And then also by using the pasture animals, we're getting the natural fertilizer from the pasture animals on the crops as well. And all that is intended to to increase the productivity of the farm. And all this starts for us. We have our people down there now that are building this, and that plant footprint that you saw, which should be operational by June of next year. So very close. So I'm so sorry for the time, but anyway, there's a lot to talk about, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we started a little late, and I know there's another panel coming, so any questions? Any time for that?
Couple of questions.
Some questions, okay. So, I saw one hand go first, back then I'll go to John. I think it's Brandon?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank
We'll be
you.
efficient.
Thanks, great presentation. Real quick question, on your lumber, are those dimensional products for standard industry practice?
They are.
Great, thanks.
Microphone coming at you.
Okay, I'm trying to make it a quick question. It's kind of a big topic though. But this question's to Don, although I think I would follow up with the public side of things. But this morning, in the talk we saw from Mosaic as well, you guys speak of the need to maximize yield, and that's the, we just saw how critical fertilizer is to crops in the Philippines and everywhere. The flip side of that need for increasing yield is the increasing population on the planet. I think this topic cuts across all of the topics we've talked about during this conference. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole on population, but I'm just wondering if, as a company, as part of your social component of your sustainability, has Yara or any of the fertilizer companies, have you ever considered investing in, there are known components that women's reproductive health, even education for girls, results in at least altered population curves. I'm just wondering if you've ever considered investing in that component as part of your sustainability plans.
So speaking on behalf of Yara, no, not that I'm aware of. That's never factored into our sustainability plan. I think in terms of the global, we're focused on the global population projection as it is today, and trying to accommodate that in terms of food supply. But no, we're not. At least at my level, this is not something that we've discussed. We do a lot in Africa in terms of quality of living and things like that, and Africa and other places, but Asia as well. But it wouldn't. I don't think we've gotten too far down the path of women's reproductive health issues.